everybody. Right. Now this is a session that I wanted to do for a little while, and it's definitely under the heading of work in progress. That is, it's something I'm working on at the moment, so any input from you, whether it's critical or supportive, that I would welcome that at any stage. Okay, so if you want to email me with something later saying, I really like that, didn't like that, that's named wrong, whatever. You know, I'm looking for that sort of thing. So just bear that in mind as I go through. So the day wouldn't be complete without starting off with some learning goals of success. So by the end of this session, we're going to understand some of the key features of our 2030 approach. Have a protocol to use in your design or in your classes. So I've got a protocol I'd like to show you to see what you think. And also understand the concept of cognitive verbs and how we will approach their use, because we're going to have some conversations around that as time goes on. So there's a fair amount of stuff to get through. We're obviously going to only touch on it in the time that we've got. Success, as far as I'm concerned, success will be if we have conversations and communicate with each other about basic forms of inquiry-based approach. That will be different in each subject area. As it relates to your area of teaching. How you can choose areas of your practice to innovate within the 2030 sort of idea. Why you select particular initiatives in your teaching, and when you choose some modes of teaching over other, or some elements of classroom activity, or some elements of your curriculum. And also, the last one there, be able to have communication and conversations around the purposes of cognitive verbs and how they're going to be incorporated into junior secondary. So there's going to be a little bit of me sort of telling, but there's also going to be a bit where you need to sort of think, and then I'm going to take that feedback from you as well. Alright, so this comes straight out of Mark Sly's original document that we all started working on way back when. I've just been very selective in trying to get, you know, what sort of rationale, focus, a key idea from that. So our approach to teaching, learning and pedagogy needs to be real, relevant, responsive and relational. And they're Dr. Sly's words, and they're not bad words to use. To prepare our graduating students for a changing world. So that's sort of where it's come from. So it's up to us, obviously, to unpack what is real, what is relevant, what's responsive, and what does relational mean in the context of education. And that's where I picked up this idea of enduring understanding. To me, this all fits inside putting these sorts of ideas, unpacking them, but with a view or with a lens that is focused on enduring understanding across time. And the three subjects here. So some of the key questions that we have seen after having quite intense meetings with heads of faculty is, what do I need to know in order to support my teachers? This is heads of faculty talking. What do I need to know to be able to support my teachers so that we're heading in the right direction? Because we've got a lot of questions coming out, like, what are we actually aiming for in 2030? How do we guide our innovation so that we have diversity, but we've also got some alignment, so we're all heading in the right direction for the college. Because obviously we could go off and innovate in every direction known to man and womankind. It doesn't mean we're necessarily going to match the needs of our clientele and of our college, etc., etc. So we need to be thinking about that. Now, how do we make sure we improve but are aligned, as the point I just made, and how do we know things are worthwhile doing? So how do we evaluate? What do we evaluate? What do we see as success? So we need to have clarity around purpose, I guess. So out of that, and having a look at all the sorts of things that people are having a go at, and I've talked to quite a few teachers about things that they've been looking for, things that they're worried about, etc., etc. It seems clear to me that you sit inside disciplines, or you sit inside domains of subjects that already have fairly well-defined methods that people have spent a lot of time thinking about. For example, in mathematics, we've got a whole set of techniques around how do you approach modelling and problem solving. In science, there's a scientific method. Now, the 2030 project is not about messing around with those, because you would be I think you'd be putting effort in the wrong place. Right? But we want to innovate around those. So the elements that go together to make that scientific method or the inquiry model that you use within humanities, or the inquiry and creative side of English, all those models that you already have structures for, look at the individual elements of those and do your innovating around those, so you're improving but within the model rather than trying to improve or change the whole model, because really that's above our pay grade, isn't it? I think we actually do kids a disservice by changing the model significantly, because they're going to go to university where there's an expectation that you know how to do the scientific model, you know how to do, you know, a humanities type inquiry process, etc. So that even that in my mind clarifies the situation a little bit. So I end up, you probably can't read that from there, but I've gone through and I've started to think about what are each of those things called inside each of the domains. Now, and I found out there's a range. There's a range all the way from almost the project-based learning that we saw with Jake when he came, to problem-based learning, to design-based methodologies, but they've all got an inquiry or an analytical process within them. So let's use the word inquiry as an overall overarching term, knowing that there's a lot of different ways that inquiry hits the ground when you're inside a subject. Because they do, and everybody in here does their method very slightly differently, and each of the subject areas does it very slightly differently, and for good reason. So, for example, in technologies, we firmly are in the design and development method. That is our inquiry process. We have a structure there already. We're not going to mess around with that, but we will have a look at the elements that are inside it. So that's the core idea there. Okay. Having a look at inquiry as a whole process, I found this is out of a book. I don't necessarily believe that they are completely useful terms, but these headings I think are useful. We know that inquiry has a continuum. It goes from very heavily structured inquiry, which is very, very much driven by the teacher and structured by the teacher, and etc. And sometimes that's the best thing to use. We go all the way down to free inquiry, where we basically let the students decide what and how they're studying. And there's a time and a place for that as well. You probably would agree that you probably need to do some of this first before you end up letting the kids go on that later, because otherwise they won't have the discipline to actually be successful. But you've got those, on that continuum, you've got from the structured, you've got control where the teacher chooses topics and does some of the resourcing, but the kids then go along and do some of the stuff themselves, they have their input. Guided inquiry, where you're releasing the reins a little bit more, letting the kids have a little bit more freedom, input, etc., etc. And you choose whichever is the most suitable, and that'll be different in different year levels, different times of the year, and in different disciplines. So having a think about where on that continuum do I go when I put my inquiry process. Sometimes, for instance, those people that teach in senior, you actually don't have an option. It's very much given to you exactly what level you're trying to hit for the administrative and bureaucratic and also discipline reasons that you need. Okay, so they're the things that we've been thinking about is, let's put it under the banner of inquiry. We don't want to go as far as the project-based learning that we were shown in High Tech High. It's at the end of the continuum. There are bits of it that we can use, but we can't build a 10-foot high wooden clock every time we sit down with kids in a project. That's just impractical. And we also, probably most of the time, we also need to focus inside our domains and inside our subjects. I think we're yet to be convinced whether we can successfully do fully integrated cross-curriculum units that serve the purposes of the curriculum and the kids' requirements. We might do elements of that, but we don't need to base our model on it. So the inquiry umbrella is where we're sitting there. So when we're doing that, I talked about focusing on different elements of the models that you're using. So what are they? What do I focus on? Do I focus on enduring understanding, engagement and relevance, student voice and choice, all of those sorts of things? Or do I just focus on particular types of activities, like peer tutoring, like having a visitor come into the classroom who's a designated expert, excursions, etc. So there's activities you can think about, there's resources you can think about, there's basic processes and aims that you can think about. That's a lot. And education is complex because it's got so many factors. So we're just going to do a little activity now that when you're in the middle of designing for one particular maybe semester or unit, this may be of assistance, it may be a way of thinking about things. And I think I'm pretty smart because I woke up at 4:30 and thought, I've just invented a new protocol. So if you see this in a book, don't tell me, because I think I've invented it myself. And if you've used it, or you also think you've invented it as well, then keep real quiet. I've given you 2 sheets, because I want you to work in about 3s, if you can, please. If you can do 2s and 2s, all right? So what I want you to do is, I'm going to give you, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to give you a time limit. I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes. What I want you to do, and I've given you a couple of examples, is I want you to first of all just write down, I think there's 13 or 14 little ellipses there. In the big ellipse, write down elements of inquiry or elements of what you would design into a unit of work that you think might be worth considering to incorporate in a unit. Now you can go content, you can go resources, you can go activities, okay, and preferably mix them up, okay. We're not going to list all of them, we don't have time, but I'll give you 3 or 4 minutes just to have a go. Fill those in with activities, elements of what you would call inquiry or modelling, problem solving, or things that you do in your classroom, elements that you would design into a unit. Okay? Like headings. Given you 2 examples already. Thank you very much.
Oh, do you mean like when they actually like type
in a realistic situation, you would be doing this around a particular unit that you're looking at, or maybe a series of units, okay, and you'd obviously give yourself more time to go through this. I've also artificially constrained it by I've drawn the ellipses on there, just because I would be able to read it later, so I wanted to make sure you space it out. But you could have that as big or as small on whiteboards or electronically. Also, I thought this might be something you could do with kids as well. So, what are the criteria that we're going to judge these things on? So, even if you're not real happy with what you've written down, you think, oh, actually, I don't think I've got that exactly right. It doesn't matter. Let's just go through the process and just look at this as a protocol at the very least. But hopefully, we're also looking at this as a subject matter as well within the context of inquiry. So, what I want you to do is ranking these things with 1 as the highest. So, don't score them out of 10 each, rank them so they've got different numbers. Go through on the left-hand side, the little tiny circle, and rank your different, however many you've got, according to how engaging or how rich you think potentially that experience could be. Then, I'll leave this up on the board. On the right-hand side, on the right-hand little bubble, rank according to how you would consider authentic or connections to real world, how you would rank that, whatever it is you're doing there. Because these are all the things that sort of come out of the inquiry. So I've selected a set of criteria, so you could do this for any other type of topic. This is to do with inquiry. On the right, authentic and connections. On the bottom, whether it supports enduring or transferable learning. That's a pretty big one to rank. And then on the top, at the top little circle, whether students actively produce a product or a solution. So obviously if you're just doing a personal practice task, then that would be pretty low. But if you're creating something, that would be up in the 1s and 2s. So there's the 4 circles. I'll give you a minute so just to quickly go through and rank those. Yeah. Some people said, oh, can I give them the same number? No, you can't. You've got to rank them, because what we want to do is we want a series of numbers so that in the end we can tot up the numbers and the lightest ones float to the top. Okay, so they're the ones that you might have a go at. So there's your effervescent sort of your Evian, whatever you want to call it, right? Or if you're doing it in Starf, it's your champagne bubbles going to the top, right? So you want things that float to the top. Now, here's another question you can say. I've got one here. I love doing this one, but it was a bubble that sank to the bottom. Well, okay, then what are you going to change about that? Your 2030 project could be, how do I modify that particular element of my teaching? Say I love doing singing formulas in mathematics, just to take an example, all right, but for some reason it doesn't rate very highly, all right, when you're working with this. So how do you change that so that some of your score, based on your criteria, will change. So how can you change it so that your singing formulas becomes more authentic or connected to the real world? So therefore you can make your score go up or down or whatever you need it to do, all right? And that means that you're innovating around something you like to do, not just accepting the fact it's dropped to the bottom and ignore it. You might want to use it. Well, okay, modify it. So go and use the SAMR model and see if you can find a way of augmenting or modifying or even replacing that so that that still satisfies the same thing. Okay? So that's one protocol that you can use, and I would really value getting these, and I will scan these and send them back to you if you don't mind. Okay? So what do I focus on in my inquiry method? Well, this may be one way you can think about it. What elements can I do that really help me with improving my engagement, authenticity, and supporting enduring and transferable goals, which is really, to me, is the big ticket item. Okay? Do you have any questions about the protocol itself? Is it usable in classes? Yeah, so you just select. Now, what's the trick? The trick really is selecting the right criteria, isn't it, for your little side bubbles.